Good morning to you, Chief Constable, and to your senior team, and to those watching online and present with us here today. You're all very welcome to this May accountability meeting in public. And first of all, can I apologise for the late start to the meeting, particularly to those that have been waiting online. At April's accountability session, we had a dedicated focus on police action in tackling violence against women and girls, and the findings of the Langdale review, which Chief Constable, you commissioned. Tuesday's publication of the independent review of the Katie Simpson case once again brings this area of work into critical focus. And the assessment of institutional misogyny, along with the catalogue of failures, is deeply troubling. Our thoughts are first and foremost with the family and friends of Katie Simpson, who have shown such courage and dignity since Katie's untimely death. This comprehensive review sets out in stark detail a series of missed opportunities, with the 16 recommendations requiring both systems and attitudinal change within policing and the wider criminal justice system. This report also signals the urgent need for wider education on the signs of coercive control and removing the stigma of abuse in working to prevent violence against women and girls. I welcome the fact that the Justice Minister has acknowledged the police service's cooperation and candour around this review. It is only through such openness that the changes necessary can be effected, so that no other victim will be failed in the way that Katie was. And that candour must continue as we go forward. There is no room for misogyny in policing or in any other part of society. Suffice to say, this review needs full implementation and integration alongside the recommendations in the Langdale report, and the board will closely monitor implementation going forward. Unfortunately, we also experienced a very serious attack on Dunbury Police Station, and the board commends the bravery of officers and staff whose swift actions undoubtedly saved lives in the Dunbury attack. And it is positive that a charge has now been made in the ongoing investigation and other arrests made in relation to the Lurgan attack. We must all remain united against violence and in support of policing. We know officers and staff will be vigilant in the threat made against them, but the community must also be vigilant in terms of what's happening in their neighbourhood and to provide information to the police that will help bring people to justice. Unfortunately, once again, we must also refer to the number of road deaths in Northern Ireland. Road deaths are at the highest level this year, and road safety messages just do not seem to be landing. Given the numbers of deaths and the serious injuries on our roads, it is important that the deterrent of these most serious offences reflects the devastating consequences of such incidents. And we have written to the Justice Committee on that as part of the consultation on the sentencing bill. We have seen the new dangers emerging from the use of scramblers and e-scooters and those engaged in reckless antisocial driving. Chief Constable, you have publicly said tough action will be taken, so if an update on the planned policing approach can be provided at this meeting, that would be welcome. And finally, can I say the decision to collaborate in the making and opening up of the service to the public in terms of the challenges faced in everyday policing in the pillars, the PSNI for real, has really humanises the people who step forward to serve the community. It has exposed the demands placed on officers and in many instances dealing with issues that are not policing matters, but the impact of societal failings in terms of vulnerability and the issues associated with drug and alcohol abuse. It has shown the split-second decision-making in often volatile situations, and the disgusting violence often directed at officers for simply doing their job. And it showed the pressures placed on the organisation that behind the uniform are ordinary people doing an extraordinary job. So we must keep focused on ensuring that policing is properly resourced and that officers and staff are supported in their work. And in that regard, we must collectively refocus our efforts to get the Westminster Government to take legal responsibility for the cost of policing legacy casework. Policing in the here and now cannot carry this burden and the issues that come with it any longer. Chief Constable, I invite you to make your opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you and good morning, members and everyone in the room and watching online. I want to start by sharing your condemnation in the strongest possible terms of the futile, senseless, unacceptable attack at Dunmurry Police Station. I said before that an attack against the police service of Northern Ireland is an attack against all of our communities. That device could have exploded at any point between the hijacking and the PSNI station. That no one was killed or injured is nothing short of miraculous. Those responsible snatched an innocent local worker off the streets and deliberately turned that person into a human bomb. The level of cruelty and distress to that individual is barely believable. Even amongst the list of abhorrent terrorist tactics, this is a disturbing low. Words fail to properly describe the vileness of these people. They deserve no protection, and I ask that anyone who knows anything about those responsible to report it before they take an innocent life. An attempted murder investigation has commenced. One man has been arrested and charged with attempted murder and explosives offences. Those responsible will be relentlessly pursued. 3 people were arrested yesterday for offences connected to the previous attack at Lurgan Police Station. 1 woman being charged with offences of obstruction against police. I pay special tribute to the courage and professionalism of the officers and staff at Dunmurry Station. In an environment of uncertainty and danger, they put the safety of others first. Running towards the threat to evacuate nearby homes and bring residents, including families and very young children, to safety, their courage stands in stark contrast to those cowards who carried out the attack. In response to the attack, we've increased our proactive patrolling and vehicle checkpoints across the country. We are aware this may cause some inconvenience. We're asking for patience as we strive to keep everybody safe. You'll also have seen that following the shocking stabbings at Golders Green in London, the UK terrorist threat level was raised to severe, meaning an attack is highly likely. We've been engaging with representatives from our local Jewish community to provide reassurance and a suitable policing response. I now wish to turn to the critical news of this week. Tuesday saw the publication of the independent review by Dr. Jan Melia into Jonathan Cresswell and the death of Katie Simpson. I want to pay special tribute to Katie, described as a bright, bubbly young woman with a bold sense of humour, a great work ethic, and a bright future ahead of her. I welcome this publication. We are absolutely committed to working with the author to achieve the implementation of all the recommendations. Dr. Melia cites Cresswell's behaviour within the equine community as just being part of the culture, reinforcing silence and complicity, which allowed his behaviour to continue unchecked. No one reported his abuse until after Katie's death. There were a number of absolutely unacceptable police failings. Many have been previously identified, including the failure to refer Cresswell to the public protection arrangements in Northern Ireland, or have his previous serious offending easily searched on the police niche system. The report highlights Cresswell's avoidance of police for his various driving offences and other unlawful behaviour that was not properly pursued as it should have been. Officers lacked professional curiosity and too readily accepted Cresswell's lies, resulting in significant opportunities to retrieve evidence and identify his coercive behaviour being missed. These failings and not investigating concerns raised by a number of people allowed Cresswell to avoid being treated as a suspect for some 5 months, causing further unnecessary pain and trauma to Katie's family. I want to pay special tribute to them, who I've met on a number of occasions. It is they who endured Cresswell's evil behaviour within the sanctity of their own home, and they have had to go through experiences that no family should. The review concludes that Katie was controlled by Cresswell from childhood, her ability to escape him prevented by the lack of safeguarding, community acceptance of his behaviour, and a lack of monitoring and oversight after his release from prison. Let me be clear. When Katie was admitted to hospital in August of 2020, we absolutely failed her. We did not treat her death as suspicious until January of 2021, when the investigation very quickly found compelling evidence to charge Cresswell with her murder. I previously personally apologised to the family for these failings, and I do so again now. They have my utmost respect and deepest sympathy. Trust must be earned. We are doing everything possible to put the issues identified in the report right. Much has changed, but these improvements must continue at pace and be seen to be delivered by everyone. Our decision-making and responses failed Katie and did not reflect the standards and professionalism that she and her family deserved, or that are expected of the Police Service of Northern Ireland. In recent weeks, I've met 2 similarly remarkable families, devastated by domestic murders. Each family has had a very different and more positive experience of the PSNI response. That should be the position for every family. And in Katie's memory, it's what we must always strive to achieve. We have been doing much to improve. In April of 2025, I commissioned an independent review by Rachel Langdale KC into the PSNI's culture, our systems and processes for tackling violence against women and girls, domestic abuse and misogyny. That review was both externally focused, looking at how we deal with such issues to ensure we improve our response, and internally examined culture, sexism and misogyny within the PSNI. The Langdale Review is shaping how we tackle violence against women and girls and concerns of misogyny and sexism. We launched the Power to Change campaign, challenging men and boys to change attitudes, challenge peers and prevent violence against women and girls. We've also been part of the Fair Play campaign within Women's Aid and the Irish FA, which promotes and teaches boys about respectful relationships. The Langdale Review and recent Ombudsman's reports highlight concerns about misogyny in policing. I have spoken to the entire organisation about standards and behaviours. No one should accept inappropriate behaviour. The PSNI will deal with such behaviour in the strongest possible terms. I will seek criminal sanctions against such behaviour, and we have a zero tolerance for it. At the very least, you will quickly lose your job. We must remember the overwhelming majority of our workforce are professional with the highest of standards and work tirelessly to keep people safe. They will be devastated by this report. As we know, violence against women and girls is a major threat to our wider society. Most recent figures show that 22,000 offences were recorded over a 12-month period. That is nearly 60 crimes a day. Prevention and early intervention are essential. Since September 2022, officers have made 6,155 arrests under new domestic abuse and stalking legislation. Through Operation Encompass, now operational across all of our 1,162 schools and educational settings, we've made more than 55,900 referrals. This operation ensures children impacted by domestic abuse receive support. Alongside enforcement and protection, we need to continue to drive prevention through phase 2 of our Power to Change campaign. This is being launched on the 21st of May and will continue to challenge misogyny and the normalisation of harmful behaviour. As an organisation, we are now very much victim focused, and we are tackling violence against women and girls as an absolute priority within the organisation. I want to turn now to safety on our roads. Tragically, we've seen further lives lost in recent weeks, bringing the total number of died on our roads this year to 29, including five people in one weekend. Each death represents a family devastated and lives changed forever. The number of fatalities is more than double for the same period last year. The greatest tragedy is so many of these collisions are preventable. I appeal to all road users to please drive sensibly, slow down, wear your seatbelt, stay focused, do not allow yourself to be distracted by your phone, and do not drive under the influence of drink or drugs. These collisions can happen to you. On Monday evening in West Belfast, we saw cars and scramblers being driven dangerously and with disregard for other road users and the public. Officers attempting to respond were attacked by mass youths throwing masonry and bottles. 2 officers sustained injuries and 5 police vehicles were damaged. The Nuala Fire Service were also attacked. A TSG, air support and resources from across Belfast were deployed, and a significant evidence gathering process took place. Our public order evidence team is now reviewing this material. I expect arrests to follow. Between the 1st of January of 2021 and the 31st of December of 2025, there were 176 injury road traffic collisions involving e-scooters. These collisions resulted in 200 injuries, including 3 fatalities, 2 of which were last year. 51 people were seriously injured. Some people have called for our officers to pursue and actively ram those driving e-scooters and bikes dangerously. I've used such tactics in the past against armed gangs. However, most of those involved are children, rarely wearing helmets. Sympathy for a more robust policing response would evaporate should one of those children be seriously hurt following a police pursuit. Our approach is to reduce harm through public messaging, partnership work, but with a robust and proportionate policing response, including the seizure of these vehicles. Only last weekend, we seized 10 such bikes. National Response Policing Week took place in April, and we've been highlighting the vital role of response officers who are often the first on the scene in complex and challenging situations. They step into the unknown at each call. In that context, I want to again encourage everyone to watch the outstanding BBC series, Peelers, the PSNI for Real. This presents a unique opportunity to tell our story more openly. Over the course of the series, viewers will see the unpredictable incidents officers face, the split-second decisions they have to make, and the professionalism and humanity they bring to the most challenging situations. This series is groundbreaking, and it will prompt debate about decisions made in difficult circumstances, but that is the reality of policing. It is demanding work. It is rarely straightforward, and every incident must be judged on its own merits. The public will see the context of our decisions as well as the human beings behind them. The programme shows that the PSNI is made up of ordinary people from across all of our communities doing a role that most people could not or would not do. I'm immensely proud of the officers involved and for their courage and openness in taking part. I'm delighted with the 6 episodes. Feedback so far has been overwhelmingly positive. I remain incredibly proud of the commitment and professionalism shown by our people and of the service they provide to all of our communities. Policing is incredibly difficult and we will get things wrong, but when we do, we will be open and transparent. We will acknowledge any mistakes and we will work tirelessly to put things right. I'm now happy to take questions, Chair.
Thank you, Chief Constable. We have a series of questions in relation to the review report on the death of Katie Simpson, and then we'll move on to other general policing issues. And the first question is from Linda Dillon. Linda.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose just initially to say that obviously today our thoughts are with Katie's family and with those who have been calling for this review and calling for justice for Katie and for the other victims of Jonathan Cresswell, because the failures did not only fail Katie, they failed all of the other victims subsequent and before. So I think that we, need to acknowledge that first of all. So just in relation to the culture of misogyny and the recommendation in Rachel Langdale's report, and I need to be clear about this because this was raised with me on the radio this morning. Does that mean everybody in PSNI is a misogynist? No, it doesn't. But there is clearly a culture and that needs to be addressed. And if it's not acknowledged, then it can't be addressed. So I am asking you today, what has that recommendation in the Rachel Langdale report for the independent survey into misogyny been initiated? And do we have a timeline for it or how it's being carried out?
So firstly, can I acknowledge the work by Dr. Melia with regards to misogyny in her examination of the circumstances around Cresswell's offending. I have raised with this board previously my concerns about misogyny in the organisation. The Langdale report identified that was misogyny in the PSNI. I have to say most of the organisation will feel deeply wounded and angry about that because they won't recognise it within their work environment. But I have met a number of police officers and members of police staff since I arrived, and I raised this with a number of people around my concerns when issues were raised with me about racism or sectarianism in policing and wider society. My biggest concern from what I saw, and some of that from the initial understanding of what happened in 2020 with regards to Katie, was of misogyny. That's one of the reasons that I introduced the work that Rachel has now done, and she'll come and visit this board in July and we'll come back to look at her recommendations with regards to her work that we commissioned in 2 years' time to make sure that things have changed. In the report by Jamelia, there are 3 pages that deal with misogyny. And I just want to hover on this if I can, Linda, forgive me. She references comments of Cresswell being a bad boy and a philanderer and describes that as trivialising that misogynistic behaviour. And I absolutely agree and accept that. She also raises the issue of when Katie was lying in her hospital bed, that privilege was given to Cresswell. His voice was listened to, and we didn't appear to listen to anybody else who was talking to us. Dr. Melia identifies that effectively demonstrates again a culture of misogyny. I know from being in this organisation now for 2.5 years, and I think the board would accept, and I've heard some of the comments the board have made publicly, that we have a workforce that do an incredible job, but we have people that we don't want, and we're doing everything we can to root them out. I've called out misogyny repeatedly at a number of events well before this report was published. I mentioned these issues at the Team PSNI events that some of you have attended. I've addressed these issues in a very unequivocal manner with regards to events at Women's Policing Day, where I actually called for people who faced any sort of misogyny to actually report it, even through my female chief of staff. I've called out such behaviour at the launch of our revised code of ethics, which members of this board also accompanied me to at Queen's University. Where we see these behaviours, we will deal with them. Reporting them is the fast track to eliminating them, so that we can now deal with those people who in any way demonstrate not just misogyny, but any other hateful behaviours within organisation, because there's no place for them. So I want to make very, very clear, this has been an area that's caused me a concern for some time since I arrived, and we will not stand for it. And we will take every action that we need to address it. A number of such actions which fall from not only the recommendations from this review, but from the Langdale review and the previous Ombudsman's report into the activities of Cresswell and the death of Katie.
Thank you for that, Chief Constable. I'm just not sure if I got an answer to whether that independent survey is going to be carried out on a timeline for it, and I do want that. I think it's really, really important, because, and I think in addition to that, we need to understand what training has been implemented, because here's the reality. If you read that report, a lot of people don't even recognise what misogyny is.
Yeah.
They don't recognise it when they're looking at it, when they're listening to it, when they see it, and unless they fully understand that, then they can't call it out. So we need to give people the tools to call it out. We need to support people when they do call it out. And all of those things can only be done by first acknowledging there is a culture. There is clearly a culture within our society. PSNI is reflective of that society. The difference between the rest of society is PSNI has a position of power. They have a position where they are relied on in order to support and bring to justice those who perpetrate and support victims. So I just think that we need to be very, very clear leaving here today that this culture will be tackled. I have a responsibility as a leader in terms of society to ensure that I address misogyny within society. But I am asking here today that you clearly give us a timeline for when that independent survey will be carried out, in order that we can then roll out what needs to be done from there, and in order that we as a policing board can actually hold accountable, have something to hold you to account to, and to hold your officers to account to. And that does not remove the fact that there are many, many good officers, but the good officers want this dealt with.
Yeah, no, I agree. And sorry, Linda, if I'm not answering your question properly, because I am angry about some of the findings with regards to what's happened here, most of which I think I heard you earlier, we've known about. So we are doing that independent survey. That's coming under the direction and management of ACC Beck. You will be aware, we did a survey last year where we deliberately introduced questions for the organisation, again because of previous concerns, about inappropriate behaviour. And in that survey, and I think it's worth mentioning in this forum, we asked the question of our staff as to whether they'd experienced any inappropriate behaviour. 17% of the organisation said they had. 4.6% of the organisation identified misogyny. We also asked the organisation if they had witnessed inappropriate behaviour, In that response, 14% said they'd witnessed such behaviour, and 3.2% said that behaviour represented misogyny. So we are going to comply with that specific recommendation to look at misogyny per se in a survey. The previous survey, by the way, that I've just mentioned, that work was put in track, that inclusion survey, to understand issues of culture within our organisation to make sure we can address and identify anything that's there, with lots of work done to address the results of that survey. And I'll bring Claire in briefly to resurvey people in a couple of years' time to make sure we're making the progress that we should make. So the timeline for the survey, that work's being done by Davey. I'll bring him in. I want it to be done as quickly as possible. We've accepted the need to do it. Somebody's been allocated the responsibility to arrange that survey. And I will say the previous survey we did bring Leapwise in as an independent body to frame the questions with our support groups to make sure we're asking the right questions of our workforce. But Claire, can I just ask you around the issues around the work that was done from those results?
Thank you, Chief. So you'll recall that we had nearly 4,500 of our workforce participate in the survey that the Chief has mentioned. And of that, there were 1,697 female participants. The Chief has outlined some of the overall results, but given that the survey happened immediately prior to the work done by KC Langdale, we've had a very deliberate sort of focus on the experience of the female officers and staff who've participated. We've actually run 23 different departmental meetings and 24 focus groups with staff and managers across the whole organisation to really deep dive into those results, hear about their specific experiences, and so that various departments and branches can have actionable insights into things that they might want to address, depending on the findings in their particular branch or department. What is interesting is that when we put a spotlight on gender, what jumps out is that women are more likely to feel that genuine mistakes will be supported when they make them. The workshops have told us that women are more likely to experience inappropriate behaviour than men, but they're also more likely to report it, and they're much more likely to do so informally. It's also, however, told us that women are less likely to feel confident that if they raised a concern, it might be properly investigated. And they've told us as well that that correlates to the fact that they might prefer for it to be resolved informally. So again, we're doing significant work with our colleagues in PSD to ensure that we have the right reporting mechanisms and approach to when a female may raise a concern. And women are less likely to feel that disagreements in their teams are dealt with constructively. So those are some of the insights that the focus groups have told us, which is very helpful when we are doing our action planning. So we think it's important that we take that work forward, because that's what 1,600 of our females have told us, and that will then help us plan and shape the independent survey that has been recommended in the Langdale report, and that will be led through the group that ACC Beck is coordinating.
Thank you for those answers. Next question comes from Nuala McAllister.
Thank you, Chair. Before I start, I have a few questions. I just want to read a bit from extract from the review that said, this review concludes that the PSNI investigation was a profound failure, characterised missed red flags, weak leadership, weak decision-making, and a culture of misogyny and complacency that marginalised Katie Simpson. These same characteristics were identified as part of the Angelini review into the murder of Sarah Everard. It's clear from that paragraph and those conclusions that it wasn't just investigative mindset or curiosity, that there was a culture and a systems issue. And for years, Chief, women have spoken up about the case of Katie Simpson, brought it to both your attention, the previous Chief Constable, the previous Deputy Chief Constable. Most of these people were women. There was Tanya Fowles, a journalist who is owed a debt of gratitude and an apology, to be quite frank. There's the female nurses that went to the police station, Katie's aunt who went to the police station and myself at this very board, in which I was called unprofessional and unhelpful. And it's so hard for women to speak up and fight a system that is so predominantly male. When you look across the table, there is one woman in a police uniform that is talking to us today, and it's really difficult for women to have these conversations around the culture of misogyny when you are dismissed and you're treated with such disrespect. Do you apologise to all the women, and what assurance can you give that this force will actually listen when women do come to you about issues of misogyny? Because you can't just say, call it out. You can't just say that you need to report it. That puts it back on the woman. That puts it back on the victim. And just because some officers don't see it, doesn't mean it's not there and it's not happening. And I will say there are many amazing officers within the force who do call out misogynistic behaviour. I have great respect from all the work that Davy Beck has done with this case in particular, and his work that he has done with myself as well. But there are plenty of officers right now within your force who do watch it, who contact me, many others at this board, and say that it's there, that it happens. And it's not just on them to call it out, and it's not just on female victims. But will that survey be independent? Will you apologise to all those women who did speak out for years and who were dismissed? And how can you provide assurances that this force will now listen and act?
So firstly, I want to acknowledge that they were right. Tanya Foles was right. The people who raised the issues about Cresswell were right. We knew that from the OPONI investigation. We knew that from conversations that we've had, Nuala, and I've said that to the family quite some time ago. What this report has done is bring everything again back under the spotlight around holistically putting things together. And I accept the report. I also, but by the way, what I say about people sitting across this table, encouraging people to come forward, we'd be criticised if we didn't do that, but we do know that we've got to ensure that people feel the confidence to report. There is, and this goes into the Angelina report, that there are confidential ways to report information, and that when that information is reported, it's dealt with robustly. I can only speak for the last couple of years, but as far as dealing with not just misogyny, but wider breaches of the code of ethics, poor behaviour, we've been extremely robust in dealing with people very quickly. You know, and it may come out today, there are some challenges around the regulations around people not being held to account in a way that we'd like to hold them to account, who are able to leave the organisation. But work is being done to address that. But I certainly acknowledge and apologise to anybody who raised concerns about Cresswell and the organisation didn't listen. If I can just deal with the policing element for a moment, and I think there's an element of your question that asks about this happening again. We've done a huge amount with the organisation around violence against women and girls. One of our 3 strategic outcomes is to be victim focused, and a very significant priority of that is violence against women and girls. And the action plan that we've started, and we've said the Langdale review will inform that, all of those recommendations we've accepted. We've actually sought out people who've left the organisation, who've been victims of inappropriate behaviour, to understand their story. And we've given access, we've ensured access of those women to people like Rachel and her team, so that they can speak in a different way in which they might speak to us. This isn't going to be something that we fix overnight. My tenure as Chief Constable here, I hope to leave this organisation at the end of my contract knowing that we've made a difference, and this is one of the areas that I want to feel we've made a significant difference. I'm grateful that you acknowledge Davy's work in this, because this isn't simply somebody coming to work to do a job to deliver recommendations in a report. We absolutely believe in this. I think you understand that, but we've got to acknowledge that we got things wrong. We didn't acknowledge that quickly enough either, from what I've seen. You know, this is now 6 years ago. I think we could have acknowledged things more quickly, even after the events. But we're where we are. And I would say you raising these issues, and not just with Katie's case, can I say there's been other cases. I've met a number of victims that members of this board have asked me to see who've been involved as families with cases where they felt things haven't been done properly or not comprehensively enough. And all of that collective learning, I think we have distilled into so much, and I do need to bring Davey in, so much communication to the organisation around highlighting their responsibility to get this right on all of our behalves. And above all organisations, above all professions, the PSNI has to get this right. We have to get this right. And even we're having a review of our training regime at the moment for our new recruits, and we're looking at having a case study. It will be based partly on Katie's case, in memory to her that those new officers come in and understand things from the very beginning, but other cases as well, where we know we need to learn lessons. And there is no resistance from that here, I can absolutely guarantee that. There's no, there's no denial around what has been found in the various reports. We've actually got on to deliver the recommendations. My biggest concern is the resources that we need to do the work that we need to do. That's for another day. But I want to be very clear. I apologise to anybody who raised concerns about Cresswell, and there are a number of individuals who I won't name because of privacy reasons who, there's separate tragedies involved. I certainly acknowledge the work that you and other members of the board have done, but also members of the organisation. And I think this is a crystallisation of the work that we have been trying to do in the last couple of years, but this will give us far more momentum. And it's a watershed moment. This is something that we need to look back on and make sure it's made a real difference. And not just the PSNI, can I just say, I meet in the author of the report to understand some of the issues. But I think this is something that the Department of Justice and other departments, we need to have a whole systems approach in response to this. Davey and I have discussed this. So that's something we are going to explore. So you can hold us to account, quite rightly so, but I think this is there's a wider responsibility across public services around this. And I will say at the end of the report, I think it's sort of page 175 to 179, there are 10 recommendations that as an agency, the report has put in that we've introduced to try to deal with some of these issues. So we are not in denial, and I accept everything that you say. But can I just bring Davey in? Is that okay?
Thank you. Thanks, Nuala. I suppose we'll just start by repeating comments I made on Tuesday when I spoke to the media about this case. And I said then, and I repeat it now, we did not listen to some of those who raised early concerns. Let me be clear, they got it right. We were too slow to respond to their concerns, and that was wrong. I just want to make that absolutely clear again. I think it's important, and I think it follows on from what the Chief has just said. I think the most important part of policing is actually listening. Listening to victims, listening to communities. And I think in this case, we didn't do that early enough. But I think you accept and have acknowledged that certainly from I come into this post, I have been listening. I've met you and other members of the board, and we've spent hours discussing these very issues. And that's really important to me to ensure that I am basing my decisions on the concerns of the community that you represent to me. And I'm happy to spend that time and to continue to spend that time in those discussions. I think there is a point where you need assurance that we have listened, and as a consequence of listening, we have taken action as well. And that's the second part, I think, important part of policing. And we have taken action. We have already revised the death investigation manual. We have initiated that investigative mindset training, and I've sat in on those lessons, and they're really impactful, really powerful, and they're based on case studies, not Katie's case study, but other case studies to really draw that experience out for particularly supervisors, which was a key element around a lack of grip and supervision at the initial stages. in terms of Katie's death. We have addressed training in terms of course of control, rape myths, etc. But there's much more to be done in that regard. And I suppose my observation around training is that almost every recommendation, every review that we get and we receive, the police service recommends training. And I think there is a risk that that becomes piecemeal. So I have already tasked out through that group that the chief referenced that I chair a holistic review of our training in terms of the breadth of issues that impact around violence against women and girls and domestic violence, to bring that together into a coordinated or a better coordinated plan from day one of new officers joining us right through the various stages of your journey through development and into specialist roles as well. And Claire's folk in training are taking that forward for me and will bring forward recommendations in that regard. But I've also personally addressed district commanders. This report references a lack of leadership, but we have structures in place that should not have been allowed to happen. And that starts in districts. It starts with the supervisory model that we have. So I've spoken to district commanders and I will continue to do that around their responsibilities. But I've also spoken to newly promoted detective sergeants, detective inspectors around what supervision means and the requirement for them to be intrusive, for them to listen to both their officers and the victims in the community as well. And we will continue as a team to do that across all our areas of command. The deputy has done significant work around standards and a review of cases in the past, and I know that you have been informed around those. We've also been in liaison for a number of months now with the coroner's office, the state pathologist, around the updating and refreshing of those risk assessment tools, etc., and the information that pathologists would have to help inform better decision making around that conduct of post-mortem examinations when we are faced with these types of horrific incidents. And we have, as you know, reviewed a number of cases that were raised by people on this board and found no evidence of third-party involvement in those cases. And those were significant reviews conducted by experienced detectives. I have restructured the Violence Against Women and Girls Governance Group to again bring in a wide range of people that have a role to play in this. And we will continue to look at all those areas. I've personally spoken to SBNI in terms of that trauma-informed embedded behaviours and investigative mindset moving forward. So there's lots still to be done. Part of change that the chief mentioned, addressing that misogyny. Our Violence Against Women and Girls action plan for the next 3 years will reflect all these areas and issues, but there's much work to be done, and we as a team are committed to delivering that work, and I'm happy to provide assurance as we move forward to this board in respect of the development of those areas.
Thank you. We'll look forward to hearing more about it, and there's no doubt that the training is particularly important because the gross incompetence across the teams and who came into contact with Katie was staggering at times. And as for misogyny, you can't fire every misogynistic officer that exists in the PSNI because it's reflective of society. So you need to deal with other ways to stamp it out and challenge it as well. My other question about will the survey be independent? If I would like that answer, but also you mentioned another victim, but there has been media reporting today, Paul Lusby, and I know that other members of this board have spoken about him, and I've spoken to members of his family. But will the police look into the circumstances before his death? Because whilst he may have died by suicide, there are reports that he was run off the road, that he was physically injured, assaulted by Jonathan Creswell and potentially people around him that were supporting him into silence as well. And I think that's really important that the forgotten victims in this case are also looked at when it comes to the consequences and the actions.
So if I can just say the survey will be independent, that's something that I can reassure you about. With regards to Mr. Lusby, I didn't want to mention his name for privacy reasons, forgive me, but I know it's in the report. I don't know of what you've mentioned, Nuala, but I can absolutely guarantee you I'll speak to you outside anything that we need to do with regards to that. If I had any knowledge or information such as that, I would have dealt with it, but we'll speak afterwards if that's okay. But we'll do anything that we need to do to reassure people, not only about the circumstances about Paul, but also any other victims. And it is an opportunity to say, for anybody, please, who is listening or paying attention to this policing board, who has any information about any offences committed by either Cresswell or anybody else, to please come forward. Cresswell is obviously no longer alive, but there are still things that we can do to help and support people. And there may be other matters that people are aware of that we can pursue.
Thank you. Next question is from Deirdre Hargey.
Yeah, no, thanks very much and for your answer so far. And I suppose, it does highlight that Katie's concerns were dismissed, whistleblowers' concerns were dismissed, and indeed members of this board's concerns were dismissed as well. And I suppose, as you say, Chief Constable, this is nothing new in terms of the report. The Police Ombudsman report of 2024 reflects the same concerns in terms of lack of investigative mindset. Obviously, this report looks at police investigative standards and that kind of cultural shift. And we have spoken about cultural change that's needed within the organisation, not just in terms of gender, but also community background, minority ethnic communities as well. So I'm keen to understand, I know Davey's given some examples of work, but what work is now being done? Because as you say, calling it out isn't going to be enough. It's the change that needs to happen from the grassroots of the organisation right up to the leadership and back down again. So what examples or changes have been made in terms of assessing risk and safeguarding? What new training is being implemented in terms of driving that cultural change as well? And I would be keen to know also what work is being done with the Police Federation, because I'm conscious even in terms of representations when it goes to discipline that they would represent them. But is there work being done with them in terms of changing a culture, which is obviously there, which these reports have highlighted? So I would be keen to see if there is work that you are doing with the Federation as well. And the other area is around, obviously, the Ombudsman is investigating, and there has been cases that you've highlighted that there needs to be a change in legislation in terms of officers then that do retire before investigations are ended. But there's obviously an ongoing investigation and there's no compellability at this moment for the Ombudsman to compel witnesses and those that have left the service. So would you encourage those officers that have retired to go forward if the Ombudsman calls on them to do so? And I'm conscious not just in this case, there's other potential cases where there are similar patterns of behaviour as well. And again, it's just to ensure that, the leadership is shown with regards all those investigations. Thanks.
Thank you. Sorry, just making a note. So with regards to what's changed, Davey will want to talk about specific training issues, I think. And I mentioned to you a moment ago, I think we have done a huge amount in the last couple of years about raising awareness about standards and expectations with regards to domestic abuse and violence against women and girls as part of the victim-focused strategic outcome that we've now agreed as our policing plan, but also because of issues raised by this board and families that a number of us have met, particularly probably me and Davey, who've expressed concerns with regards to investigations. So this is nothing new with regards to the organisation. I mentioned the team PSNI events, but I constantly do messaging to the organisation where I talk about these issues and what I expect and the standards. We have done, through the work that Davey's got in his group, and he'll talk of it, a lot of work to disseminate the findings which we entirely accepted from the 2024 report from the Ombudsman, to make sure that those lessons were embedded and learned. And the culture of having that investigative mindset is something clear. And I'll give you an example with regards to domestic abuse cases. I say at Team PSNI events, particularly to younger officers, because they're so busy and the radio's going for the next call, take the time you need, go with your instinct, speak to neighbours, do not leave that call with any doubt about the safety and the security of that victim. We know that so many homicides come from incidents of domestic abuse. We know that it takes so many actual occurrences of domestic abuse before often, whether it's the police or other partners, become aware of it. So all of those messages have been reinforced. I think to set the organisation on a path for the future, to do some sort of case study with all of our student officers coming in at the very beginning, and they do already have input from, and we have Women's Aid involved, but to do something that captures all of the issues that we're talking about here, but we've probably been talking about in the 2.5 years that I've been here for those student officers, is something that I think would be something of a legacy actually for Katie's memory, and to make sure that we get these things right from the restart in the future. I think we have made huge progress on the information I know with regards to that investigative mindset from people. But I don't think there's anybody in the organisation now who doesn't understand the issues with regards to what happened to Katie. And I know Nuala referenced that people should read this report. I would encourage them to, but we also encourage them to read the Ombudsman report. And again, we communicated with the entire organisation then as well. And around the Langdale report, we communicated with the entire organisation about that. So there are a series of things that we've been doing. And we are getting there, but do you know what? There is a huge amount of work to do. There is a huge amount of work to do. Just on the issue of Police Federation, the Superintendent Association and NIPSA, I'm going to include them all, if I may, all the staff associations, because they all have a role to play. We have changed the structures within the organisation, so they now sit at our Strategic Management Board as observers. They understand what we're trying to do within this organisation. And I have to say, I think, and I hope I speak sensibly about this, people in those organisations don't want people who shouldn't be police officers or members of police staff in the PSNI either. They have a role to play in supporting them where they may have committed misconduct offences. But I think they would advocate that their role is to make sure that process is properly followed. They don't do that in a way that I would be concerned about them seeking to keep people in the organisation that we shouldn't have. They do what they need to do to support those people through those processes. But we very much have a very positive relationship with those associations, and they understand what we're trying to do, especially in this area of work. Officers who have retired or left the organisation, or members of police staff, I would encourage anyone and everyone who is asked to assist with any inquiry, as I am very certain I will, and I think that will probably be happening for years after I retire, that I will cooperate with any inquiry. I think it's part of the public service. Obviously, they can make a decision not to do that. At the moment, there is, and we may get some questions on it in this board, some real challenges for people around their involvement in inquiries for events that happened many years ago, because it creates a huge pressure on people of a certain vulnerability and fragility. So it's not a straightforward answer to a question. But I would always advocate for people who've left the organisation to assist any investigation or inquiry, whether it's the Ombudsman or a legacy inquiry, when they have left the organisation, if they can help with the information that's required. I think that was the set of questions. Did I miss one, Deirdre?
No, that was it. Thank you.
David, can I just ask David to come in?
Yeah, it was maybe just to pick up on the risk assessment, but specifically, I know I touched on some of that maybe in my previous answer, but just to maybe confirm, and I spoke previously to the board around our risk management process, particularly around domestic violence, etc. So we have what we refer to as the DASH form, which is effectively guidance that walks officers through that risk awareness, risk assessment process. That's been updated a number of times, clearly on the back of the recommendations now and Jan Melia's report, we will review that again to make sure that it identifies those core issues around things like coercive control, etc. And that forms a basis to help and prompt officers to ensure that there's a consistency as much as possible around that early identification and recognition around those risk factors. That has been supported in the past with specific training, but again, I've mentioned that I think there needs to be a more holistic approach to that training from initial inception into the force right through to the specialist departments. And then our public protection branch will review those risk assessments and both challenge and support the recommendations in respect of those. So there's that added professional element of curiosity added around that as well. And I think that's the right and proper thing to do. And what I would say, you mentioned Angelina, and particular response to exposure type incidents, and certainly public protection branch will review all those incidents now. And again, challenge back where we feel that they haven't been properly addressed or concerning behaviours identified. So that process is in addition to the dash form. But I'm conscious that risk assessment is also about the wider multi-agency response to these types of incidents. And this report draws out the fact that there's others have responsibility in this field. We don't have all the information. We have lots of information, but we don't necessarily hold all the information. So there is an element here around the OPONI arrangements, around the consideration of risk for courts and bail, etc., that I'm, certainly up for the challenge of having those conversations with those other partners around how we best ensure that there's adequate, timely, and full collaboration and information flow. That's been a core issue for many, many issues and reports over the years, not just here in Northern Ireland, but collaboration, information flow that should be easier to achieve than it seems to be in reality. And certainly I'm up for the conversation with the department and other partners around how we enhance that moving forward.
Just a wee quick one on that, sorry, Davy, around driving the cultural change, because it mentioned in terms of the grassroots, and obviously having community-centric policing is a critical aspect in terms of recruitment and stuff as well, and making sure that it's representative. But is there concerns, or do you believe that neighbourhood extraction is hindering some of that, or?
Well, what I would say is our resourcing predicament right across all departments hinders our performance in many areas of work. I mentioned public protection branch. Today, they're 60 officers below where they should be. Neighbourhood teams are significantly below where they should be. And that's the reality of the resourcing picture that we're currently faced with. So all of this links back to how we resource policing moving forward. And I think we have to be reflective on that as well.
Our next question is from Peter Osborne.
Thanks. Two questions, if I can, and reinforcing in some ways what has already been said. And I think it's important to acknowledge, as you have, Chief Constable, that this has been going on for 6 years. I don't think many of us can imagine what that family went through 6 years ago, never mind what they're continuing to go through in the public glare because of the feelings of others. And I don't think this is just a PSNI thing, but I do think it has been very clear for a long time that part of this is about men not listening to women or trying to quieten women in some ways. Not many men, of course, it's a minority all the time, but I think as a man, we also need to acknowledge that. And this is as much a man's issue as it is a woman's issue. I want to ask you two questions really on it. One is, we hear a lot about cultural issues and change of culture within the PSNI, and yet we continually come back to suggestions that there are cultural problems within the PSNI. Continually come back to it. The problem with that is it provides oxygen to those that want to denigrate policing, and it makes it more difficult for those of us who want to promote positive policing. I want to hear more about the urgency of change from the top down within the organisation to tackle these cultural issues. And secondly, and I think linked to that, I know 30-something% of the PSNI are women, and I think we would all want more women to join the police as well. This is why we talk about diversity within policing, that the more diverse a team or an organisation is, the less likely it is to have cultural issues like these becoming evident. So can you talk about the teams that are investigative teams or other teams within the PSNI, what their diversity was, is, and will be in the future with urgency to make sure that as far as possible that diversity is reflected in those teams?
Okay, thanks, Peter. And I just want to endorse your initial remarks with regards to this topic as well and the family. So this was August of 2020. I do believe that things have changed within the PSNI as you as a board holding the organisation to account in all those interim years. Things have changed for the positive. I've got absolutely no doubt about that. As the Chief Constable in the time I've been here, and I can't speak before October of 2023, but I felt that things have changed within the organisation with regards to culture. The purpose of doing the team PSNI events was to set out the expectations of me as the Chief and the senior team of the organisation. And I think the survey that we did last year, which actually built on a survey that was done early in the spring of 2023, shows a positive direction of travel around culture in the organisation. And to reassure you, we will do the independent survey that's been recommended in the Langdale review, specifically on misogyny, which will be independent. That was accepted as soon as Rachel made the recommendation. But we'll also, in probably 18 months' time, because that's the time, it should be at least 18 months to 2 years before you do a survey again of a similar nature, build on the survey, some of which are the results I gave from last September. So I think there has been some positive change with regards to the culture. Sometimes that's hard to measure. One of the best measurements is, and it alludes to Nuala's remarks earlier about people coming forward and not putting this on women, but it is on the confidence of people coming forward to report inappropriate behaviour. And my example of that would be questions in the survey to say what percentage of the organisation would repeat inappropriate behaviour. In last year's survey, it was 45%, which I was incredibly disappointed with. But it was a survey question that we're able to compare with England and Wales, and the officers in England and Wales that would come forward was 24%. So it was twice as likely that an officer here would come forward. But we want to measure all of that going forward. So there are a number of issues, I think, with regards to confidence with support groups who also attend the Team PSNI events, of bringing the organisation to a place where, through a number of measures, people have a clear understanding of the expectation of them within the organisation, not least of which is the revised code of ethics as well that we did quite recently that you were present for. I would just want to move on to the representation and the makeup of the organisation. We want this organisation to be broadly made up of society. I've made that very clear. I don't think we've done enough. I've said that at the last policing board as an organisation to change things with regards to our recruitment. I have challenged the political members here will know I've spoken to all the political leaders around getting more advocacy for people to join the organisation. I've actually spoken to the organisation at Team PSNI events and through a blog to everybody in the organisation at our next recruitment in the autumn to actually seek out people that will be outstanding future members of this organisation from all different sexual orientations, from different cultural backgrounds. We need this organisation to represent the people of Northern Ireland. We are actually, as an organisation, we're at 33%. I think we're just below 33% of female officers. That sits broadly in line with policing in England and Wales. We're higher than the Met. I think we're in the top percentile, but we're not at the top. But there's a consistency with policing elsewhere. But I want that to be higher. I think with regards to police staff members, we're in something like 55%, something like that, of our organisation. The Guards, I think, are well below 30%. I think the Fire Service are around 10% of women members of the organisation. But I'm not complacent around having representation throughout the organisation of more women is going to be a really positive thing for the organisation. And we have done, in the last couple of years, a number of programmes to encourage women especially to go into what were previously seen as male-dominated roles, such as firearms. To achieve that, we've actually brought people in from other forces who have a good record of achieving that to help us with how we attract people to apply for those roles and how we can give reassurance and adjust elements of training to get into those roles. So we are doing lots of stuff that accumulatively, I probably sometimes don't feel it, but I think is making a difference with regards to representation, not just with regards to male, female, but across different characteristics. I might just bring Pamela and maybe Claire in. I don't know if they want to say anything on that.
I think, Chief, you've covered a lot of what I down, which is that diversity and representativeness is important right from recruitment, but your point right through the organisation. So particularly as the student officers go into their probationary period, they embrace into local policing teams. But your point is valid around as people move through the organisation, particularly into investigative teams, how are we ensuring that diversity of the teams is there? And I think it's really important. So concur with everything the Chief has said. The only other thing I had done as a comment there was, if you've been, and I think a number of you have been to the Team PSNI event, there is a story that a victim records her story, who has actually suffered domestic abuse number of years ago and then more recently, and that experience had significantly changed in most recent times. And when she asked, and that she was saying she felt it was positive and that she was listened to, she was supported and indeed given confidence to be able to achieve those criminal justice outcomes. And she asked what's different. And officers had explained to her that it was the training around domestic violence and so forth, violence against women and girls, that had been rolled out across the teams. So listen, we do recognise that ongoing training is hugely important, and that, you know, the diversity from all sectors and from all groups is hugely important in the teams right across the organisation, and not just as they present, particularly on the officer side, into local policing, but that we pull it across the organisation.
Can I mention one more thing, Peter? Sorry, just about Peelers. Peelers is an incredible, I think, programme, and it's taken some time to achieve this type of fly on the wall police programme in Northern Ireland. Anna and Jade are great examples to young women who might want to join policing. And I don't think we should underestimate what we're trying to do in so many different guises to help people understand what an incredible profession policing is, and from different backgrounds as well. But I just wanted to mention that as the advertisement for policing that I think Peelers is.
Yeah, thanks for that. And that's all genuinely useful. I suppose the question back around the diversity within teams, you've acknowledged that that's a good thing. I'm also saying there is an urgency to us and to the public and within the organisation to say you're addressing these things. So how are you actually addressing diversity within, for example, investigative teams? Not to say it's a good thing. What are you doing about it? And when are you going to make sure there is diversity within those teams? Because that's part of the problem, I suspect, that caused the issues that we've been talking about for the last 6 years.
I'll bring Dave in. What I will say is, and I've avoided talking about money for this policing board, and I did talk about money in my opening remarks, but we need to recruit people into this organisation to move this organisation forward, both with regards to our effectiveness and efficiency, but also with regards to our diversity. And that is incumbent on getting the funding support that we require. Davey.
Yeah, I would just add, Peter, that in terms of gender, the gender makeup in terms of female officers across the investigative branches is actually higher than across the rest of the organisation. But there's still work to be done, and still we need to ensure that we continue to build on that. But I don't know if Claire has the specific details around that, but it certainly would be higher in the investigative branches.
Okay, I have a supplementary question from Marian on this issue.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going back to an issue that I've raised many times with the Chief Constable, and it goes back to the issue that, you know, has been raised by Peter, but it also links back to misogyny as well. I know on paper the PSNI have, you know, flexible working policies around the type of working hours you can get. Anecdotal evidence would tell me from female officers that I spoke to, whilst the policies are there, you know not to ask for them. And so that's the first thing. And you're made to feel guilty if you do about the effect you're going to have on your team because you want to work less hours than Jimmy beside you. And that does, and again, anecdotally, come from other male officers. Recruitment, you're targeting females. I can say this as a female, obviously the male members of the board couldn't, but you're recruiting women at an age where they're starting to think about having babies. So you're asking females to come into the force and then you're telling them, but you've got to work all these shifts and you're not going to get any reduced working patterns. Now, again, I accept that you do have that on paper. I'm only telling you about some of the realities. So it's not about you not having the policies, it's about how they're being implemented. And that goes back in part to misogyny as well. You know, so no matter, it's great to have all of the policies and to get all of this information, but if the reality on the ground is that women feel that they can't put their names forward to get more flexible working patterns, then again, anecdotally, and by some of the female officers I spoke to, they speak with their feet, they either leave or they go off and sick. You know, so there's a root problem there that needs to be addressed. I mean, I was a working mother myself for many years before flexible working came in. I made a conscious decision as a young woman not to have more than one child because I couldn't handle the demands of the job and work full time. Thankfully, that's not like that for most women today. It was for me, but from what I can see, there's an element of it still amongst some within the PSNI. So if you're really going to promote women working up through the ranks and really seeing the PSNI as a career, you really have to find out why these policies aren't being implemented. Your own figures told me there were 3 people who were doing job sharing in the whole organisation out of an organisation of over 6,000. There's something not right there.
Okay, well, firstly, I want to reiterate that the policies are there for people to use and they should use them. And people can always come to me with any concerns that things aren't being properly made available to them. My own experience is that women who have got young families and also are in the workplace, often through arrangements through shared roles, work much harder because they feel they've got to prove themselves more. That is an experience I've had for the last 40 years in policing. It's also important, I think, I say this because it goes to Peter's point, but also, and this is something you've raised before, Marian, we had a recent, or the last promotion process we had for chief superintendents. We're just about to undertake one again now. Out of 7 chief superintendents, we selected 6 women. Our head of serious and organised crime, Gillian Kearney, yesterday on the television as the district commander down in Derry. My own chief of staff. These are women who are an example to the organisation and for people who might think about a career in policing. And I know we've talked about peelers, but we're doing a number of podcasts of people in different roles in the organisation, including those who will have, if you like, challenges with regards to undertaking the role of parental responsibilities or caring responsibilities, about how policing can work for them, to try and make sure that people understand that policing is a profession, not for everyone. Peelers will show that. Some people will watch that TV programme and think, I can't do that. But those who think they can do it and are young parents, and at training school recently, I met 2 officers with young children. We can make it work. Where there's a will, there's a way, and the policies are there. So any examples where you feel, because we often get anecdotal comments, that people are not being provided with the support they should be, please draw them to my attention. I will bring Claire in though, because I think she's probably got some information that might assist with regards to reassurance.
Thank you. Yes, maybe just in terms of reassurance of the availability of family-friendly provisions and policy. You're quite right that I think there's a very small number recorded on our system as technically job sharing, but that's because many of those individuals will be recorded as working part-time. So we do have a very positive performance in those that are seeking part-time or flexible working. And flexible working can be compressed hours, can be part-time, it can be a particular type of schedule, all provisions that we know support women quite often, or carers, and that we also know that majority of carers are also female. But of those who apply or want to be considered for some type of flexible working, we are have a very strong performance at supporting that and accommodating it where we can. There are certainly jobs within the organisation and roles within the organisation where that can be accommodated much more easily than others. But again, the systems and processes that we have in place enable local management and then across the service to try to identify that so that we can support females as they take on caring responsibilities, and men, you know, who have caring responsibilities, and as they progress through their career. So I wouldn't want the public or members to think that the number is as tiny maybe as you've referenced. So there are definitely individuals who avail of that. We've recently been working on, you know, a greater provision of our sort of family-friendly policies and support, and that covers everything from helping people who are thinking about starting a family and to help guide and help them in their policing career, for carers, as I've mentioned, and also to help our staff and officers understand what's available should they need to take emergency or special leave to deal with personal or family-related crisis or emergencies. So we're acutely aware that that is very important. We also know from our recruitment activity that one of the single biggest questions that any job seeker in the market asks is, what is the sort of flexibility provision? And policing does have a 24/7 element. So that's a very important balance that we get. And, you know, I think we've got some fantastic role models that are demonstrating that it is possible to have a, you know, very rewarding and progressive career and balance the external and the other requirements that they might have to work flexibly or to care for elderly or other dependents. I'm also really pleased to say that last year we had a whole round of internal promotion and selection, and I think the Chief has referenced it, but just by way of example, 40.7% of those who were successful at being appointed as chief inspectors were female. So we're seeing that women are having the opportunity to progress, and we're delighted at that. Maybe just one final comment. There's been quite a bit of discussion just around cultural change and relating to gender. And I think in any organisation, we know that cultural change, the greatest impact there, of course, it is about the diversity and representativeness of the workforce and within teams. But most importantly, it's about leadership. It's about line manager capability and the impact that line managers have on their teams. It's about performance and it's about accountability. And you'll know about a range of initiatives that we're undertaking to look at all of those, and all being overseen through a culture development implementation group, which is chaired by myself and the Deputy Chief Constable.
Check. Can I mention one more thing? I'm so sorry, Marian. Bobby just reminded me. We have a vacancy for the district commander at Belfast currently. We had 3 applicants. They were all women. 3 of the 4 senior local policing roles in the PSNI are now women. We are planting trees with regards to the organisation, and I just want to say that some of that evidence is now coming through. Okay.
Need to say one thing.
Yes, Dirk.
Sorry, I'm conscious of time. Just to say a couple of things back quickly. I totally accept what you're saying. But and about, you know, that there's, once people apply, there's good positive, you know, routes through it. My issue is around people who aren't applying because they've been told under the table, don't apply because it doesn't suit our team. Secondly, I'd be very curious, and we'll never ask this because it's probably against lots of legislation, how many of those women that you're talking about that have come through the ranks, if you got them all in a room together, what they would tell you about their experience of having to juggle their families and this job, more so than their male colleagues would have. You know, that's just a reality. You can beat it about the bush all you want, but that is a reality. Every working woman in this room knows it. I know it personally. Pamela sitting over there knows it. So they may be coming through the ranks, but what's happening is loads of women still aren't going forward because they're not prepared to do that juggling act that the guy sitting next to them doesn't have to. And that's the issue that I would like to see addressed.
Okay, going to move on. Next question is from Colin McGrath.
Thank you very much. Chief Constable, I suppose the importance for today is that the issues that we're discussing are fundamental to the values of the service that we want to see, and that's why it's important that we have this conversation and keep Katie and her family in our memory as we have that. And it is really important that we identify the problems and then that we respond to them. And there are now a number of reports that contain a number of recommendations which will require implementing. I agree with everything that you've said, more or less. I'm just going to depart on one part of it, which was that the issue about resources is a conversation for another day. I think that conversation is fundamental today, because if you don't have the resources, you're not going to be able to affect the change that is required. And all that we will have done through this process is identify problems and then hold ourselves back from being able to deliver it. So could you give us a flavour about the amount of resources that you have and whether you're confident that it's going to deliver the change that's necessary? And if you have that confidence, can you pass that confidence on to ourselves?
So this is about prioritisation with the, and you know, we're in the year 2 of our recovery business case, Colin, to go to 7,000 police officers by the end of the next financial year, and just under 2,400 police staff. To do that this year, we need an extra £26 million from the executive. What they have said is that they will support that. But we currently have around about a £60 million gap. If on paper they give us the £26 million for the uplift, which is this year is year 2 of the recovery business case, but they take money away elsewhere, effectively they're not supporting our recovery business case. And I know the financial position this year, this new financial year, is wickedly difficult with the forecasts. But all we're asking for is the proportion of that budget that we should properly be receiving. And if we do get that, we won't have to take people out of public protection who we might have to put in legacy to satisfy the legacy demands that we've got, because we might get legal orders against us. Whilst also, of course, all the things we're talking about now, a lot of it is about, my own view, this is about leadership. Okay, this is about leadership. It's about leadership from the very top and the people along this table, but leadership right through the organisation to sergeants on the ground. I'm in a process of seeing every sergeant and EO1 and EO2 police staff equivalents over the next couple of years to say what I want, what I expect. And the Katie Simpson case will figure in that. But if we don't get the resources that we need, so many elements of what we're trying to do around these recommendations become much more challenging for the reasons that we don't have the people to do some of the work that we need to be done. I will bring Dave in, because Davey manages all of the integrated elements of all of the recommendations, and it would only be fair if I asked him to answer the challenge around resources.
Yeah, and I think you've covered it really well, Chief. There is significant issue, and I've touched on that already. I mentioned public protection branch, but right across crime department today, again, as we speak, there's 262 officers not there that we should have. So that limits just in one department what we can do to deliver day-to-day services for communities right across Northern Ireland. So the risks around service failure, setting aside this particular issue and this particular case, the risks of service failure are real because of the demands and the pressures. I know you as a board are due to visit Public Protection Branch, and you will see that at first hand, the stress and strains, the demand, and the issues that creates around our aspiration to provide the best possible service to every victim across the community, and the reality of how we are juggling demand, resource. So it's a real challenge. So it's useful that I can bring all this together through one governance group to try and address all these issues collectively. But there is that reality piece that the Chief has touched on, that without proper resourcing over the long term, not just 1 year, over the long term, we will struggle to make real advances in terms of how we draw people into the specialist departments. That's notwithstanding the fact that we still have to ensure that there's the right numbers in neighbourhood policing, in local policing, in roads policing. So all of those departments and branches are facing the same difficulties and challenges that I face within crime.
Can I just add very quickly, sorry, Chair. Colin, I mentioned this before, but to give you a sense of the linkage to the resources and the topic today, because of the tragic circumstance of what happened to Katie, our Violence and Sexual Offenders Register, the offender management team who deal with that, they should have one officer for 50 offenders. I still think that is incredibly challenging, but that's College of Policing recommendations. We're more like one officer to 120, I think, at the moment. We do various things to mitigate that around categorisation, but that's because of our resourcing, because we're so below the headcount we should be. The major investigation teams who investigate domestic homicides, they should have a workload, a caseload recommended of 8, and I think we're currently at an average of 20. So that these are the reality of the challenges that we face.
Okay, thank you. We've a
Chair,
follow-up.
sorry. Chair, can I ask a tiny supplementary?
Not yet,
on that?
sorry. We've follow-up from Tommy.
So, Chief, thanks very much. And let's just maybe to continue the conversation around resources. And clearly, in terms of what you've had over the last number of months, presents significant challenges in terms of that whole series of recommendations. Langdale, Katie Simpson, the Ombudsman's report into the abuse of power for sexual purposes, your own inclusion survey, and you've got all of these actions to take forward in order to affect that cultural change. But not only that, you're also trying to transform the organisation in terms of how people work, where they work, all those other changes that you want to take. So there's a big agenda for you. But at the moment, in terms of for this year, subject to getting your funding for workforce recovery, and lots of other organisations in the public sector are having to deal with the pay pressure issues. It's a common theme. But if you get funded for it, you're going to receive an additional 300 officers this year, plus on average about 250 staff officers coming into the organisation. So there's an injection of new resource coming in. And the question I'd really like to ask you, and I totally recognise that this senior management team are totally committed. No tolerance around misogyny, around harassment, around discrimination, around abuse of power. But this team alone cannot deliver the cultural change. It requires the organisation to change, in particular those line managers. And there are lots of great officers in the PSNI. But in terms of the culture of the organisation and what the values are, in terms of what we believe, what ways people should behave around this, you require boots on the ground. You require people in the organisation driving your message on a daily basis. And the question I'm asking, Chief, is what sort of level of investment are you going to make into the PSNI in terms of your priorities for all those additional officers? Where does cultural change, transformational change feature in your priority list if you want to address those recommendations?
So transformational change, we've got Aldrina here. That's an area that we have invested in very recently around resourcing because of where we want to move the organisation. I'll bring Aldrina in to talk about some of that. A lot of the cultural work, and Davey will probably look at me and say, well, there is a cost with regards to people and numbers. That is often so much more about a number of the issues we've been talking about here, but about mindset and behaviours, the unacceptability of how certain people might behave and making sure that that is addressed. That is not something that I am overly concerned about resourcing. I am concerned, and you didn't mention some of the core constituents of policing. Last night I spoke to Gillian Kearney, the Chief Superintendent for Derry City and Strabane, about resources because of recent disorder there. We had disorder on Monday night, which I mentioned in my opening remarks, to see if we've got sufficient additional resources to deal with that. I'm concerned about, obviously, this epidemic with regards to deaths on our roads at the moment. So I'm speaking to Mel about what we're doing to make sure that we're doing more around addressing that. We know that every day the scourge of paramilitaries exists, particularly in certain communities. We should have 950 community officers, neighbourhood police officers. We've probably got 450. They are the areas that we've got to invest our resources. What I can tell you is that every level of this organisation, whether police staff member or police officer, I think have an awareness today, and not simply because of Jan's report, but because of the work that's been going on for a while now, of the expectations of behaviour and conduct in this organisation. That comes from a number of different activities that have been undertaken, not least of which, and I mentioned I was going to see all the sergeants, this process has started in the O1s and the O2s, about making sure that everybody on this table is walking the floors and speaking at every level, every tier of management of this organisation, to have a shared expectation with regards to what we're trying to achieve. And there's an understanding about what happened to Katie, not just Katie, by the way, there are other issues, not for today, that we make sure we're addressing. I think last year I dismissed 12 officers, the year before 12 officers, and I have a significant number of fast-track hearings this year, which sends a clear message about behaviour. And by the way, I say that with a very clear caveat. I listen to every case carefully, independently, and I weigh up the circumstances and the evidence before I make a judgment. But it's sending those clear messages.
Sorry, just, and I'm not disagreeing and saying that those other policing priorities are not important, but in the middle of this, there's always a balance issues, and there are decisions to be made. But clearly, in terms of things like vetting for officers in service, things like whistleblowing, things like the composition, going back to Peter's point about local police and neighbourhood teams and the gender balance in the middle of those, issues around training. And I'm not talking about sort of online training, I'm talking about face-to-face training.
Yeah.
And we've discussed here previously about the number of temporary sergeants and the number of permanent sergeants who are not receiving face-to-face training, and then going through that process of understanding what the organisational priorities are. All of that requires resource to be committed to support it. If you're going to build a new police college, you need resource in order to make that happen, to close those existing police stations, get the officers ready, get them moved. And I'm not saying that this should be the priority over everything else, but I'm saying surely it must be one of the top priorities if you really want to affect the cultural change and not be back here in 2 years' time or 3 years' time with more adverse reports.
We will be back here, but I'm hoping that'll be after Rachel's 2-year return, and we'll see how we are going to measure the progress with regards to Jan's report, but constantly telling you what we're doing and you holding us to account. So you mentioned a couple of areas. Bobby will speak about this. I'll bring him in. We are investing in PSD. We are investing in vetting, but the strain on those two parts of the organisation are considerable, because everything for me when I talk to PSD through Bobby is a priority, and everything that we do with regards to vetting is a priority. I don't think they've got a non-priority list in vetting. It's an incredible challenge, but there are other ways with software and looking at what other forces are doing that we can be smarter around how we deal with vetting. But this whole element of how the organisation behaves, how the workforce feels, the confidence of the workforce is fundamental to how we deliver policing. So this is an absolute priority. If I can just bring Aldrina in, because of I said I wouldn't, around the investment around transformation, because when I came we didn't have any investment in transformation, and we have done that. Probably not to our greatest satisfaction, but we've certainly done it. And then I do want to bring Bobby in, if I may.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, first and foremost, any of the transformational change we do, I think, is rightly focused on the workforce, because the change can only happen through the people, whether that's through the skills and abilities that we have and or the ones that we don't. And that sits very much in the resource constraints and priorities. What I would say is where we've started on the journey of the transformation piece is very much on establishing the workforce basis, and the workforce recovery plan was very much focused on trying to at least stabilize the organisation, as board members will be fully aware, and halting our decline. But we have made some developments in other areas. We're talking today very much in the cultural space, and quite a lot of the work has been going on in terms of whether we talk about the inclusion survey, the findings from reviews, etc., and the changes that are happening, particularly within, for example, the occupational health and wellbeing space. We've been doing a lot in the workforce in terms of changing our approach to those and investing in those areas, certainly in year one. Where we're at now, and again, members will be aware of where the three sort of areas of service transformation that we're focused on are very much about demand management and looking at alternative ways of delivering service to create capacity in the organisation. Things like right care, right person, which Ryan leads on, is very much looking at that sort of longer term demand management. But we're doing things in the here and now, and members will have heard from our video officer attendance team and other ways of dealing with, and you mentioned even in terms of different ways of doing training, but different ways also of delivering policing. Not least yesterday at our transformation board, we identified another cohort of significant officers where we're looking at the function and the role that is in the organisation and saying, well, in terms of prioritisation and where we might go with this, could we utilise their skills in a different place? So we've identified another quite significant cohort, and all that contributes to resourcing to deliver and freeing up capacity to respond to the areas like we've talked about here today, with freeing up officers back into high priority areas such as PPB. But there are gaps. There are gaps in delivery. We've recently appointed, and you know what the chief mentioned about, perhaps not to my satisfaction, there are areas where we have invested, and this board helped and supported us, certainly to at risk make decisions about halting some of our capital developments in the last years to allow us to acquire the new Redburn site at Kinniger. That will be an opportunity for us to now to scale up. We've recently appointed and got the right expertise in terms of a capital development lead for planning for that. So that has helped. But we do have gaps still in project management. We have gaps across, you know, our digital change areas in terms of supporting some of that, and not least also in our analysis space. But again, we are working through trying to bring those forward, particularly with the workforce we're planning year 2 and 3, and we'll continue to progress that. And the estate, because you mentioned it, Tommy, obviously we're also trying to contribute through upscaling our disposals where we've identified there's opportunities to do so, to invest. It won't by any means reach the level of investment we'll be requiring, but it will at least contribute as positively as we can. Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to stop the discussion at that stage. I'm just conscious of time, and the allocation and priority of resources is a topic we will return to in the future.
Sure. Can I just make a quick comment?
Go ahead, Nuala. Yeah.
I don't want the message to get out there, and I think the chief tried to allude to it, some of his points. You don't need extra resources or finance to not be a misogynistic police officer. And I think it's really important that message comes out from both the board and from PSNI. That's just simply a fact. You don't need more money and you don't need resources to not be misogynistic.
Okay.
That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, thank you. Our next question is from Cheryl Brownlee.
Thank you, Chief Constable, for your answers so far. Today's about Katie and her family and the brave people that put their head above the parapet, and these people are on this board as well. And I think today that you've given an apology, I think it is a great step forward. I suppose for me, what sticks in the back of my throat is to date, after years of this investigation, no one's lost their job. There has been no serious sanctions. Officers have retired and walked away, and they aren't required to attend the inquiry. And for me, I can't see genuine accountability there. And that's the bit that I just can't get over in this situation. As well, how can you increase the confidence of women and whistleblowers coming forward and reporting things to the PSNI? that they will not be dismissed, that they will be taken seriously, and this does not happen again. In the chamber on Tuesday, the Justice Minister obviously discussed about legislation, bringing it forward that officers who retire or resign during misconduct will then continue to be investigated under that change in the law. And it's just to get your opinion on that. Are you supportive of that moving forward? And I think it's really important today. We've talked about misogyny, which is at the core of this, but Creswell was an evil person and he had a status in society, so people let him away with it. And I think that is a core as well, that the PSNI need to come out hard and strong to say, I don't care who you are, I don't care what your status is, we will go after you and we will get justice. And I think that is real core to this as well. Thank you.
No, thanks, Cheryl. So I'm going to bring Bobby in because of the misconduct. I mean, that was again dealt with. Dr. Melia covered the details of the Ombudsman's investigation, the number of officers were interviewed under caution, the number of officers who were dealt with through the misconduct process. I think it was 18 officers initially that came under that gambit. What I do just want to say is about women coming forward, and this isn't just me, there's other people sitting beside me on this top team. I've sought out a number of female officers who I've been made aware of going back a number of years have not had a positive experience when coming forward to report sometimes their partners or sometimes just activity by colleagues with regards to misogyny and other unacceptable behaviour. So I've actually gone to see them to try to understand what their experience was like and how we can make sure that we address concerns, so we give everybody who has any concerns the confidence to come forward. I mentioned it earlier, but that did lead to all of those officers and staff agreeing to see Rachel Langdale to explain their experience, which is distilled into the report that Rachel did. So actions speak louder than words, and I think I speak for everybody in the senior team that that is an endeavour that we all share, and that's having results. I'm pretty sure about that. With regards to the optics of this, I have to say this: when people look at events such as happened to Katie, and there's no holding to account of individual officers, and I certainly, if I was a family member, I would be incredibly frustrated. Bobby will explain some of the nuances of that and the limitations of what can and cannot happen, and actually what happened, the proportionality of dealing with people who didn't deal with that incident properly. There has to be a proportionality to it. What I can say, and I think it's far more important, and I hope it's coming out from the board, and it alludes to Nuala's last comment. This is more for me about this organisation, and we've done it since 2024, accepting that we got this wrong and trying to reassure people that we are doing everything humanly possible to correct that and learn the lessons from what happened. And even our engagement with Jamelia and the recommendations, the 10 recommendations we provided that are at the back of her review, I think provide evidence that we are determined to get this right. And by the way, we might not do as quickly as you want us to. We might have some challenges in doing what we want to do, but the endeavour and the effort is going to be 100% there. And it is going to take some time. This isn't going to be fixed by the next policing board or the policing board after that. This is probably the next 2 or 3 years, and it fits in with our violence against women and girls actually strategy and action plan that Davey manages, which we've said would be informed by Katie's report. Let me bring Bobby in because he can speak and give some context and explanation about that issue around the disciplinary elements.
Yeah, thanks, Chief, and thanks, Cheryl, for highlighting the issue. So it's my understanding that there were a total of 8 officers who were subject to some form of misconduct recommendation, either directly linked to Katie's murder or indirectly. 2 of those officers had misconduct subsequently proven at misconduct meetings and received management advice as the sanction. One of those 2 officers received that management advice specifically for their handling of the investigation. The second misconduct matter was kind of tangentially linked to it. You're quite right, 3 officers retired prior to proceedings. And it's important to stress that their culpability, or in fact their actual wrongdoing, was never established as a result. And it would be our position that that's wholly unsatisfactory for Katie's family, as you've alluded to. And of course, they're foremost in our thoughts today. It's wholly unsatisfactory for the police service, and it's actually wholly unsatisfactory for the officers themselves, because it undermines transparency. You've touched on it yourself, undermines accountability, and it significantly undermines community confidence in policing. And what it also does is leave a stain on individuals, whether that's their personal or in fact their personal or professional reputations as well. We're very clear that is something that absolutely needs to change. You've alluded to it. The Minister mentioned this week that reform is forthcoming. We anticipate that it will happen before the end of this year. In fact, we met with the DOJ as recently as the 23rd of April to kind of reinforce our support for the change to the regulations in order to allow retired officer misconduct to be able to proceed. That's just one of a number of further changes, which I think, you know, could be seen as being relevant to the circumstances surrounding Katie's murder. So we're fully committed to working with the DOJ and indeed the board to reinforce and strengthen the police misconduct regime to make sure that it does what it's supposed to do, which is enhance community confidence in policing.
Just in closing this section of our questions today, one final point. We now have the Langdale report and the independent review into the death of Katie Simpson, a number of recommendations in both from which will flow actions in terms of implementing those recommendations. Can you give us a timeline when the board will receive that overarching action plan?
We were talking about this morning, Chair, and we want to speak to Jack. We want to engage with Jack Melia around some of this. I think at the moment we probably can't do that because I want to engage and with the Department of Justice, because we're looking to try, and I alluded to this earlier, to make this more of a holistic whole systems approach to some of these findings. If you could give us a small amount of time, we'll come back to you on that, unless Davey wants to add anything on that.
No, I think that's absolutely appropriate in terms of the ask, Chair. I think we also need to recognise that there is the multi-agency element of this as well. So I think this has to be done in tandem with the other agencies to make it that holistic approach that the Chief talked about.
We're going to move on to other policing matters, and because of the time constraints that we have, we probably won't get through all these questions, but once we don't, we can take in the private session after this. But also in terms of time, can we just have one answer? So Chief Constable, that's you, that's fine, but or if it's one of your senior team, but we can't have a couple of people answering. The first one is from Keith Buchanan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chief Constable. You alluded to in your opening comments, and so did the Chair, with respect to the Dillon MLA attacks and obviously previously the Lurgan attacks. And in your report, you refer to relentlessly pursue. Okay. So the question directly is, have you got a grip on these people and organisations carrying out these attacks?
So we have, but I'm going to bring Dave in because I'm very conscious that the Chair will glare at me if I speak first.
Well, again, the short answer is yes, absolutely. And you know, I have the privilege, it has to be said, to see at firsthand the work of our officers day and night, every day, to suppress the threat from violent, dissident Republican groups. Thankfully, those groups are small, and thankfully, those groups have no real community support. And our work continues night and day to suppress that threat that those groups continue to have. And let's be clear, you know, and I've talked to the board in the past around this, that those groups continue to have both the intent, the aspirations to attack police, but also the wider community as a consequence of their actions. And we saw that both at Lurgan and Dunmurray. Also the coercive control that they thrive on in their own community. So we're doing everything we possibly can to address that, working really closely with our partners. And you'll have seen a number of searches, a number of arrests in terms of both those incidents. And I think that sends a really strong message in respect of our endeavours to bring people to justice in terms of that. Threat levels for across Northern Ireland related terrorism remain at substantial. and that means that an attack is likely. So I think that again enhances the level of visibility, vigilance that is required to address those groups. I think there is, I heard a comment over the last week or so from a security expert who said that every day that there is no attack is a success for police and partners, and certainly that's the point I would make today, that we work really hard to ensure that the vast majority of their intentions are never delivered.
Just want to come back on that. You referred to in your report about unanimous condemnation, which is right. There's no grey area, that needs to be condemned. However, I've got mixed messages. I've got this mixed message in the chamber where some political leaders will condemn an attack in 2026, but won't condemn an attack in 1976. Now, yes, that's 50 years ago, but the effects of that is still there. My point being, we've now groups seeing that and listening to that an attack in 2026 is wrong. All attacks were wrong. You can't, you have to condemn all attacks. You just can't say they're regrettable. So, is that giving you a problem that political leaders in Northern Ireland are not condemning all attacks over a long period of time? And is that giving credence to some of these new groups that think what may work for them may work for us?
So I'm not going to get dragged into politics. I'm speaking to political leaders because I don't think enough's been done to advocate for policing collectively, jointly. What we need is a moment where we've seen previously with Reverend Paisley and Martin McGuinness coming together to make sure that this place moved forward. What I don't want is a league table of who supports policing more. These attacks are criminal terrorist attacks. They all need to be condemned. But what I need our political parties to do, and this fits in with section 15.2 of the Pattern Report, is come together to advocate for policing together, not separately, not try to snipe at each other, together. That's what we need. That's what the men and women of the PSNI need. And that's what I've asked for. All terrorist attacks should be condemned. I'm very clear on that.
Okay, going to move on to a question from Peter McReynolds.
Thank you, Chief Constable. News reports recently highlighted that 500 women a day were being advertised as independent escorts in Northern Ireland, with the majority showing red flags of being there due to organisations they're due to being coerced and controlled and profited from as well. What's your response to that news piece, and what's being done to tackle these websites who are actively facilitating the abuse of women?
Well, firstly, thank you for the question, Peter. I met Lord Morrow a little while ago, and I wrote to Ofcom about these very websites because of some legislative power that they had to deal with them. And I'm happy in slower time, Chair, to share that correspondence with you and what we're trying to do to impact on those websites. What I will say is we have seen a shift to completely online from people operating as sex workers on the streets. And we have got some legislation here with regards to people who pay for sex, which is a criminal offence. But proving that offence is incredibly challenging. I've got some statistics here that between the 1st of April 2025 and the 31st of March 2026, we had 28 arrests under that legislation. 11 people were charged, 24 people reported, and we've had so far only 3 convictions. Some of that is because of the evidence gathering process. What I want to reassure you about, and I'm not going to bring Dave in because the chair will stare at me, is that we're doing a lot to make sure that we're working to protect those women who have been exploited. Some we know have been trafficked, and we've done a number of serious and organised crime joint operations with Angana Shikana to actually protect women who are being exploited in that way. So it's something that is a focus for our serious organised crime element, and I can promise you we're doing everything we can, not just with regards to the perpetrators of the crimes who are exploiting these women, but the people who are making significant amounts of money running these websites. and I'll share the correspondence with you, which I'm still pursuing.
That was the chair will be pleased to hear. That was my supplementary question. So really pleased to hear that you're taking that forward and look forward to the information in the summertime.
Thank you. Next question is from Gerry Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. And you referred to some of this earlier on, but I think you'll be aware, Chief Constable, of the stuff that was happening on Monday up around Stewartstown Road, close to Twinbrook. It was chaos. There's no other way to describe it. It was all over social media. You can see it. I think my point is that I know that the police knew about this early. They had advertised it. They have a new saying for this. I think it's diffing or dizzing or something like that there. It was connected, advertised as connected to this alleged young man drug dealer who died accidentally. And it was posted up and all of that. I know that contact was made by representatives in the area to the police at an early stage in the afternoon. And I seen some of this myself, but not all of it. I have said people coming and telling me as well as what I've seen on social media. But the reaction before knowing that they came, there was no roadblock put up. There was no, roadblock, just asking people where they're going. They knew where they were going. I would like to know if you know, because you said evidence was taken, if the cars were stolen or if they were in their own names, are people going to be arrested? And the advice is early. I think I have to say that the operation didn't work. There are ABCs in this, which anybody at the table I'm looking at will know, that you can prepare things coming in and de-escalate. It ended up escalating out of control. He also mentioned earlier if we could add this, because it's connected. Obviously then what happened was it was crowds of hundreds, most of them young people, but also a number, also young people, but a bit older, on the e-bikes, on scramblers and all of that there. Sometimes it's referred to as ASB. It wasn't ASB on that day. I mean, just watching it, I am totally surprised there was nobody very badly injured or killed. And they were missing each other driving past fast. Anyway, just to get to the point, I do think that because there was plenty of notion for this, that an operation wasn't put in. And then what happened is when eventually the armoured vehicles came in, it was frankly too late. And then, strangely enough, they nearly became the problem because they were just sitting in it. I do know that there was a marked car, liveried car at the roundabout, where two police officers were sitting on that there, which could easily have given advice of cars not to go down that road because you can see the whole way down. And they didn't. They wouldn't come out of their there's a risk. I have to say it's a risk-averse approach, which I don't understand. And by the way, this is before he ended up with hundreds. This was to try and prevent hundreds because he ended up with a car jam the whole way, which was well over half a mile anyway. So you've also talked about the injuries you given, and I'll repeat them, but you gave them earlier on, but there was deaths involved in that. There was many from 21 till 25. I know that you want to do something you said about a robust approach, but when you were talking, you repeated what has been said before, that the current approach is public messaging, raising awareness, proportionate police response, seizure where necessary. I agree with all of that, but it's not sorting it because the people who are doing it are not listening to the messaging. And it is becoming a huge problem. And I'm just wondering in terms of even legislation, because you also mentioned that, is there advice from yourselves in terms of what legislation can be brought in? I understand that you said 10 of these bikes were seized.
Okay.
I'm assuming that you probably had to give them back because I know that in Britain that they're looking at a pilot where they can destroy them after 48 hours. And until things like that happen, and it's going worse because they're too easy to get now. People are banning them on an ongoing basis, and that's just at Christmas. So could you speak to that, please?
So I will speak to you after this meeting because I did speak to Mel Jones, who was the ACC on call, but because of the chair's direction, I'm going to bring Ryan in, and I have some very clear views of this, but I'll speak to about that after the meeting. Ryan.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Thanks, Gerry. The first thing to say, Gerry, is that what we saw Monday night were scenes of disgraceful, unacceptable thuggery, and those involved should just hang their heads in shame. I doubt they will, but they should. And that's why my team and I are determined that as quickly as possible we get people identified, we get some doors knocked, and we get people arrested in relation to what we saw there. And I feel so sorry for the community and people living locally who had to witness it, see it, and see the aftermath of it the next day. I think maybe helpful just to give you a bit of if you like, the perspective in terms of how it went forward from the policing side during the day. Because I understand and I've heard some criticism of our approach to it, and I totally get that. It is natural when something like this happens that we start to think about what could have been done differently, and we're very much people who listen and want to understand those perspectives and take on board what people are saying in relation to it. So what happened in the afternoon, we got some information through, as you rightly say, in relation to this event, this diffing event happening in the area, and mobilised resources in relation to it, neighbourhood policing teams, the automatic vehicle recognition cameras, mobilised evidence gathering teams and other resources to move to put an operation in place. When we've seen these diffing events before, they haven't necessarily brought with them significant amounts of disorder or criminality over and above the diffing that we saw. It was pretty plain pretty quickly that this was quite different. So there were significant crowds, as you've highlighted, of young people and others who really wanted to get at us. So there was significant attention drawn towards policing. It was a busy bank holiday, so many of our resources were tasked across Northern Ireland, some of the specialist ones that we needed in to support that work there. So during the course of the afternoon and into the evening, some of those resources that we're doing the security patrol that we've had to do because of what happened at Dunmurray, other taskings around the beaches and the other areas we've seen antisocial behaviour, tasking those back to Belfast, which took a bit of time to get them there and get them into the right kit and equipment to do that. And at which point then you saw some really significant kind of hostility towards policing. We got to a point, you probably had about an hour and a half of that when it, from 7 o'clock through to about 9. And I should say we also set up a silver command post to be able to help coordinate all of this as well. We took a view at that point that actually we were becoming part of the problem, as you rightly said, so it was very much focused on us. Started to de-escalate the amount of police we had in the area, and then we saw the disorder start to reduce in relation to it. It's great you've asked the question today because it gives me the opportunity to talk publicly about it. I think also probably as importantly, Kelly Gibson, who's the local inspectors, met with political representatives and others just this week to talk to them, hear what their views are on it, answer questions around it, and see if there are things that we can take from it when we start to think about dealing with issues like this again. So the now and next for us is the criminal justice bit. To try and identify people who come to that event, their vehicles, etc., and also those involved in the disorder. And would appeal for any information people have about that, please bring that forward to us, and I'll be making sure we put the right resource to allow us to make arrests and prosecutions in relation to what we saw. More broadly, and I'm very conscious of time, but you'll get the opportunity to chat to Mel another point. Her team, from the policy perspective, have been doing a lot of thinking about how we might be able to deal differently in the future in relation to not just diffing, but electric scooters and other vehicles like that, with a view to, yes, the messaging, but also what legislative gaps do we need to fill here in Northern Ireland to allow us to be much more proactive in dealing with it. The bottom line is they're not fit for the road, they shouldn't be on the road, they're not legal on the road, and that's our position on it.
I have a follow-up from Trevor.
Yeah, can I just come on one second?
Okay, sure.
My main point, because it turned into disaster, and there's disaster for policing as well, but my main point is at earliest, because the knowledge was known at an early stage, some less robust efforts could have made a difference. That's, and the crowds wouldn't have came, but it's basically stopping them getting to the place, I think was the key to it.
Okay, Trevor?
Thanks. I think actually, Gerry, for raising this question, it sort of fits in with my wider question. I suppose we look at what happened last year in terms of disorder in Northern Ireland and the effectiveness of releasing images, whereas we've had this disorder, and also, albeit it was not similar, but we had the same disorder attacking a community within the Fountain area of Londonderry, where there were sustained attacks on that community and indeed officers. So what I really want to ask you, following the success of the past experiences from the race riots, when are you going to routinely give out those images of the people, whether those ones in the diffing, or whether it's the ones in the Fountain, or indeed anywhere else in Northern Ireland where disorder takes place? Because I see these people don't like being shamed, they don't like to see their pictures on social media, and they don't like being called out. And the sooner you do that, I think it'll be much more effective.
Yeah, I can take that one, Chair, if that's right, Ryan. So we've had some disorder this week in Derry. There's been some problems at the interfaces there for 2 or 3 weeks, actually, Trevor. And you'll be aware we arrested 2 teenagers yesterday. And I actually got a member of the public who I know from down there contacted me about where are the images, because you put images out previously at race riots. We introduced a policy to make sure we release these images to help identify and deter. It deters people when they see images of themselves. There are some criteria with regards to ages that we have to be very careful of. The young people in Derry who have been involved in disorder this week, I have to say, by and large, we think we know who they are. We're going through an identification process. So when we need to release those images to help us, we will. I want to be very clear around, and I know I'd stay quiet, Chair. I was furious about what I saw with regards to Monday night. And we have got a poet team, as Ryan mentioned, going through those images, and we will release stuff to make sure that we identify people and arrest them. There is a staged process to make sure that we've done everything we can identify them through before we do that, and that mechanism is underway. And if we know who they are, we're not releasing the images. We're just going to get our ducks in a row before we go and arrest them. Okay.
Our final question is from Alan Chambers.
Thank you, Chair. I certainly welcome and support the efforts to close the loophole that prevents the police from conducting an internal investigation of misconduct by an officer once that officer decides to retire. However, is the Chief Constable content that officers who have retired without blemish continue to have their mental health welfare supported in relation to horrendous events that they were exposed to during their service? At this time, I particularly have in mind those former officers involved in the Omagh Bomb Inquiry who have recently spoken out very publicly on this issue.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. I sort of alluded to the Omagh case when I spoke a little bit earlier in answer to Nuala's question. There's been some incredibly tragic event occur recently with regards to an officer, retired officer, who was assisting the Omagh Bomb Inquiry, and that has led to a suspension of support by one of the groups that provides assistance to retired officers giving evidence and support to that inquiry. I'm going to go and see that group, and I know they've written to the inquiry. I'm also going to see the family of the officer involved. Listen, we need to make sure that where people, and as I understand it, this is the case in this circumstance, actually come forward to do what we were talking about earlier, help an inquiry, give information to people who've been seeking information for many years, who actively try to do that in a professional way, that we make sure that the environment for them doing that is conducive and supportive, and that they receive, whether it be legal or welfare support, to enable them to do that. And I know concerns have been raised, and certainly I think this board knows our approach to welfare. We're workforce focused for those serving officers and staff, but also retired. I'm determined to make sure that we do everything we can to learn the lessons of what may recently have happened. And I know that Anthony, ACC McNally, has been heavily involved in this as well. So with your blessing, Chair, I'll just ask Anthony if he wants to add anything else to that.
Yeah, thanks. I will keep it as brief as I can. Chair and all, thanks for the question. And the Chief has obviously referenced the tragic loss of life, and our thoughts and sympathies are with the family of that retired colleague. I think that's symptomatic of, Omagh, as we all know, was the most tragic loss of life of the Troubles, 29 lives and 2 unborn twins, but also the trauma that our colleagues, ex-colleagues mostly, suffered in terms of attending that day and having to deal with that absolute atrocity of our past. There are probably, in terms of reassurance to you, our approach to the Omagh Bomb Inquiry is, of course, to provide the information that inquiry seeks as openly and as quickly as possible. And that's absolutely right and proper. And in order to do so, I oversee a goal group that looks at what the police response is to that. And that is, of course, challenging. We've heard a lot today about the challenges of policing today, and we've talked a lot at this board previously about the challenge of the police in the past. And the resource challenges I have in that legacy space are well documented as well. But in terms of when it comes to supporting our ex-colleagues, that's absolutely fundamental to my thought processes, and well-being is an agenda matter that's discussed at every single gold meeting I have. There are 2 primary ways in which that inquiry will ask us or will lead us to seek to speak to an officer. One is where they directly, by what's referred to as a Rule 9, ask us to contact a retired colleague to ask them information about what their involvement may be in respect of a certain matter relating to the Omagh inquiry. Or secondly, if they ask us a question and we don't know the answer, we may reach out to former colleagues and ask for their help. When we do that, it is done in a thoughtful and considered way. And there's probably 4 things which I'll just quickly run through that ex-officers have brought to my attention. Firstly, it's around anonymity, that some do not wish to be disclosed to the public, their identity in relation to that inquiry. And we offer, when we contact them, we offer to support them with that anonymity application, because we realise that many of them are retired for quite some time, and that could be a traumatic legal experience for them to have to want to go through. And when we're doing that, the second point then is legal support. The Chief has just referenced it. I'm absolutely clear that when we speak to ex-colleagues, we say to them, we can help you, but if you wish to get independent legal advice, then that's absolutely your right, and we will help and support you in a manner in which to do that. And that's in place. Thirdly, it's around the psychological services. Many of them are suffering from PTSD as a result of their involvement in Omagh. And they feel quite understandably that the inquiry is bringing resurfacing all of that. So it's so right and proper that we support them in doing that. The Police Rehabilitation and Retraining Trust are the legislative and funded body to provide that support to ex-colleagues, and I've certainly been engaged with them frequently in relation to ensuring that's the case. There are, of course, some challenges around that in relation to accessibility. A lot of the services from PRRT are based in Belfast, but PRT are very committed and are working with the relevant bodies that support ex-members who were involved in Omagh to make sure that those services are available local to where they may live. And then fourthly, the other issue that's been raised, and I've seen it on social media this week, is access to their records. Obviously, those are very key documents to the inquiry, and we have to make sure that we properly protect those, which is in line with how any other public inquiry and the police response to that would be. But it's absolutely our intention, and it has been common practice, that we're not asking officers to drive to Sea Park where the records may be kept. We're getting those records, we're taking them to them, we're asking them where we can meet them at a place and time in a police station that suits them to be as accommodating as possible. So those are probably the 4 key issues, and I've personally been down on a number of occasions. I've spoken specifically to the military and police support group in Tyrone in Omagh. And actually, just of real contemporary interest is I'm meeting tomorrow. I suggested it would be helpful for all the support agencies to get together. So tomorrow in the Police Rehabilitation and Retraining Trust building tomorrow, I'm meeting with both them and all of the relevant support associations to see if there's any further we can do as a result of learning from the tragic death of a former colleague.
Very brief supplementary, Chair. Just recently, a few officers, ex-officers, have approached me about having made an application to the Victims Payment Scheme. And some of these officers have been involved in some of the most harrowing mass murder atrocities that have been carried out in Northern Ireland. And they're having their application knocked back by the scheme. Is there a mechanism within the PSNI that can assist those officers?
Absolutely, there is, and I'm happy if you wish to share their details with me. The Victims Payment Scheme sits within Legacy, within my area of responsibility. So I'm absolutely committed to, if there are particular issues you wish me to look at, I'm more than happy to do so.
Thank you for that.
A quick follow-up from Trevor.
Can I think the answer to this question? I mean, I think this is something that's come up on the board in terms of how many officers are broken. Anthony knew I was in touch with him through a family friend of the deceased in this case, and I took a reassurance from him that the contact has been made, which I welcome. However, it speaks to the wider problem within policing, and indeed reference made today, and I'm not trying to change the subject entirely, but the Pillars programme. I watched it and listened to one of the officers, and you could actually see the trauma on that officer in terms of what they were doing in terms of their duty. But what this speaks to me is there's the serving officers and there's the retired officers, and it says to me that there's not an adequate support, psychological support. We can talk about these different systems we have, or different organisations, but there's gaps. I mean, Anthony's just referenced, I was down the maps as well. I walked Omagh with, you'll know who I'm talking about. It's as if it happened yesterday. He was explaining to me exactly where people lay, where things had happened, where the device was. The man was welling up. After so long, that man's still living that, and he's obviously living in fear of the inquiry as well. And there's so many more like him. And I think the service as a whole, and it's a difficult one, but the service as a whole needs to do more to support both the serving and retired. And I would love to hear what we can do as an organisation to do that.
I mean, I feel I should say something. I've been to meet all the organisations, and obviously I have a real sympathy with what you're talking about. I'm very happy to talk about anything that we can do. We certainly do more than other organisations for retired officers, but I think that's because of the unique context here, and we should. I won't dwell on this, and we can speak afterwards, but we weren't doing some of the things that we're now doing previously, I can assure you, and maps will tell you that. So we have done a lot more than previously, but I'm open for conversations about what more we can do, and I'm keen to help.
Okay, thank you. In closing today's meeting, I want to take us back to where we actually started, which is Dr. Melia's review into the death of Katie Simpson and her finding of institutional misogyny. And in terms of institutional misogyny, I think we must be clear, it is not solely about a few bad eggs. It is about wider unconscious bias and unconscious behaviours in a uniformed, male-dominated environment. And to address this, we need a strong values framework. And I believe that the updated Code of Ethics, which clearly calls out misogyny and the requirement to call out inappropriate behaviour, provides that values framework. It requires investment in training, particularly first-line managers who set the standards in the front line. And together, this will create an environment where inappropriate, misogynistic behaviour is not acceptable and will be called out. And Chief Constable, we take assurance from your comprehensive answers to the questions here today. And I think we must emphasise that violence against women and girls is a top priority for policing in Northern Ireland. And victims can have confidence in coming forward, that they will find professional and dedicated officers who will listen to them and thoroughly investigate their complaint. So please do come forward, you will be heard. I want to thank everyone today, those that have joined us in the room, those that have joined us online. Chief Constable, to you and your senior team for your answers. That concludes today's meeting, and our next meeting is on the 4th of June.